All right, today I'm doing a little bit of rework on the second serial card for the Data General Micro Nova here. This chip is probably bad, but I don't know if it's fully bad, and I want to try and swap it into place of this chip, so literally just swap that this one was right there. But I wanted to do a simple video here describing the process for removing the chip, because these Data General circuit boards from the 70s are horrible, and it is super easy to damage the traces on the board because they aren't well glued to the fiberglass. So I'm going to go over the process of how I am removing this chip, specifically using Chip Quik here, in a way that makes it safer to remove, and it should make it so that I hopefully don't damage anything. It's still totally possible that I will, but this should help make that at least a little bit safer. So let's go over this all now. Now, this is going to be kind of a 2 or 3 step process, depending on how you look at this. So we have all of the solder that is on the chip right now. Oh yeah, I forgot this is an awful, awful process. Ugh. This Data General circuit board is like the worst possible case for this. The legs on these chips were folded over before they were soldered down. So we have weak solder, or no, we have weak pads with legs that we have to bend while heating the pad so that we can desolder the solder out of the via. So basically what I have to do here, you can see this leg is bent over. I have to melt the solder and then bend the leg upright so that I can get the desoldering iron around it later to pull the solder out. And I have to do that for all 40 pins. Flux smells so weird. There we go. Okay, so that's all the pins bent correctly. So now I need to get the desoldering iron warmed up, and then I can remove as much of the original solder as I can. All right, now that we have the pins bent in a way where I can actually use this, I'm going to pull out as much of the original leaded solder as possible, and then we're going to use the Chip Quik, and I'll show you how that works. But first, I need to remove as much of this solder as I can. And this actually is a little tricky because I want to get the tip as close to the angular ring as possible, but I don't want it to actually touch, because then it puts bad forces on it and can break it. So I'm going to be extremely careful here. Okay, that is as much solder removed from that as I'm going to be able to. Now, if I try to remove this part, it's not going to come out. There's still just a tiny amount of solder on the top side of this that's going to be holding this in, and it's just not going to work. So here is where the trick comes into play. So this is Chip Quik, which I think is a bismuth solder. I am actually not sure if it is a good idea to touch this with your bare hands, so I'm going to wear a glove for this. I think it's maybe not a great idea to touch it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply some flux to the top side of this chip and then melt the solder through the leg. So we're going to refill this with the Chip Quik. But Chip Quik is a super low temp melting solder. I don't know if it actually says on this what the temperature is, but it's ridiculously low temperature. I'm gonna fill this with solder, this low temp solder, and then I'm gonna use a heat gun to melt all of the solder at once and then just pry the chip off directly. Now, the reason I'm doing this from the top is so that I know in order for it to reach the bottom, it has to flow through, which will increase the thermal mass and the thermal conductivity, because if I only do it on the bottom and it doesn't flow through to the top, then it will not conduct the heat up to the top of the pin, and it won't succeed in fully desoldering it. And then when I try and apply a little bit of pressure to pop it off, it won't succeed in doing that. I'm going to look at the bottom side after this and make sure that every pin has solder on the bottom. The ones that don't, I'm going to apply more solder to the top. So I can see here, solder has flowed through the bottom on every single one of those pins. So those are now filled with the low temp solder, which is perfect. For these last four, I'm going to touch the top of the pin with the soldering iron and then just push the solder into the leg itself. That is some low temp solder. All right, so I have a little bit extra here. Let me flip this over, make sure those all filled in. A couple of those ones near the resistor I don't think did. I'm gonna do what I said I wouldn't do, and I'm gonna fill those in from the bottom because that resistor area was kind of a pain in the butt. Now, I need to get this into my PCB stand. All right, so now I'm gonna see if we can get it to just fall. I don't know if it will, but what I'm gonna do is turn on the heat gun and then just hit the backside. It's gonna melt the solder, because it's really low temp solder, before it torches the board or starts to melt anything else, and the chip will loosen up. If it doesn't just fall out, then I'm gonna take some tweezers and I will hook it under the legs on the sides and pry on it just slightly. Basically only putting as much pressure on there as the weight of the tweezers. But let's see if it just falls. It probably won't fall because the stupid bent pins will catch. This is still getting up to temp. I can put my hand directly under it still. All right, it's coming loose. I got the front side out a little bit. Let me work on the back. There we go. Now, I'd really like to contrast this to the heat discoloration that happened on the CPU board for the Micronova. That is so much cleaner by contrast. So, yeah, this is a way easier time on this thing. So, yeah, I'm really happy with the results there. But, yeah, there is how you can easily remove a chip from a very difficult to work on PCB. Chip Quik and the right methodology is an amazing combination. All right, and after using the vacuum desoldering iron, I've cleaned out all of, well, I see a little bit more there. I'm gonna have to hit one more time, but I've cleaned up everything from there, maybe also a little bit there I wanna pull off. But I use the desoldering iron and some flux and just empty blank clean tip, that's it, clean. Soldering iron tip, and removed any shorts or anything by just fluxing the solder to flow on the traces. And yeah, that's all looking pretty good. So now I'll be able to drop a socket in here and continue on with what I'm doing. So yeah, I really like the results here of this Chip Quik. It is REM 4.5-NL for what I'm using.